welcome to the Hockomock Filmmakers Presents The Film Connection. I'm Lauren Sussman, your hostess, and on behalf of the Hockomock Film Festival, I want to welcome you to our show. We bring the Film Connection to you several times a week here on Comcast Channel 9. The show is dedicated basically to filmmaking for filmmakers of all ages. This evening we have a special guest with us, Gino Del Guercio, who's a filmmaker and director from the area. So I want to say first hello to you, Gino.
Hello.
And thank you on behalf of our film festival for joining us. The aim of our show is to bring people in TV and film industry, share their expertise, help to inspire and promote the local activities, and really to give each of us some sort of impetus to go out and really explore what we like about filmmaking, script writing, costuming, any sort of thing. The film festival sponsors several events to help people to network and to really gain knowledge in the film industry and TV and video production. We have a film club that meets every other Friday evening at Andrew's Bakery on Belmont Street in Easton, where we show free of charge great works of film, from acting and directing credentials to foreign films to film festival winners of note. So you need to take a look at our website, hockomockfilmfestival.com, for our film schedule. And you can also, at that website, see our production schedule here for our TV show. So if you catch the end of one of our shows and want to see it in its entirety, you can check our production schedule there. We also sponsor an annual film competition that culminates in our June Awards ceremony that's hosted by Stonehill College. So look for the parameters of that competition. We have 3 different categories that we collect entries in. We have drama, original music video, and also documentary. So tons of information for you about filmmaking, film interests, just for the fun of films, and if you're interested in seeing what your neighbors can produce. So I hesitate to go on and on and on about what we do because I'd like to get back to our guest. He has a fascinating project in the works. We're going to be able to enjoy it shortly. So Gino, I'd like to talk more with you about what you've been doing. You've been here at a previous show discussing your latest project, and we asked you to come back because there's a lot to talk about. You have a wealth of knowledge and education opportunities for everybody here. So I want to get right onto your project. So hello again.
Hello.
For the few folks at home who might not know you, if you could just give a brief background on your life and your interest in filmmaking, and it'll help us to place you a little better.
Well, I'm a nonfiction film director and producer. I've been working in the industry for 25 years. I began as a producer at WGBH Channel 2 in Boston.
Okay.
And I've been working as an independent filmmaker for the last 20 years or so.
Right.
I've produced for a number of shows for PBS, plus Discovery Channel and A&E.
Great. And you've also thankfully been one of our judges for our film competitions in the past.
It's always enjoyable.
So your expertise in actually the kinds of things that we look for in our community festival are pertinent in the outside industry as well. So now you have had a project in the works for several years now. It's almost finished. You've brought with you some finished footage, and also I want to hear all the millions of stories that you have. So could you share a little bit about this latest project?
It's called Abandoned in the Arctic.
Okay.
It's a 2-hour PBS special about a 22-year-old kid named James Shedd, who is the great-great-grandson of Adolphus Greeley.
Okay.
Adolphus Greeley in 1881 was sent by the U.S. Army to Ellesmere Island, which is one of the closest places on Earth to the North Pole, to conduct 2 years of scientific experiments with 24 men. Unfortunately, he went up with 24 men and he only came back with 5. Because the United States Army was not able to get up and bring him back, and so they had to make their way south on their own. It's a tremendous story, and it's not very well known. Shackleton, who's an Englishman, is much better known than Greeley, but in my opinion, Greeley did as much and should be more famous than Shackleton, because his experience was more difficult than what Shackleton did, and yet Americans don't know anything about Greeley.
Wow.
So we're trying to
you came
change
to this
that.
project. Tell me how you became interested.
Well, I was hired as a
discovered it.
director by a guy who is independently wealthy and who became fascinated with the Greeley story
Okay.
and put together an Arctic expedition and asked James Shedd, this great-great-grandson, to come along. And so in June of 2004, 9 of us went on a hired plane, flew all the way up to Ellesmere, which frankly, I didn't realize how far north it was. The distance between Ellesmere Island and Boston is the same distance as Boston and as Venezuela.
Oh, wow.
It's 1,800 miles,
Wow.
straight north. So it's really far.
See, we think we're north here, that
Yeah,
we have no idea that there's a whole nother half of the planet up there almost. Wow.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really far up there.
Okay, so now how much outdoor knowledge, experience had you had up until this point?
Right. Well, you know, I'm like the average person. I ski,
Okay.
and I've been in New England for many years, and I've
Okay.
done even a little bit of outdoor camping when I was young.
All right.
I wouldn't say that that element was particularly difficult.
Okay.
We were there in the summer. We were there in June and July, 7 weeks.
Okay.
And the temperature never got below the 32.
Okay.
It snowed. We got a foot of snow in July one day.
Wow.
And it could be pretty cold and miserable, and we only had tents. We had no heaters or anything like that.
Okay.
So it could be difficult at times, and when it was overcast, it was pretty cold.
Right.
But we had good equipment, and when the sun was out, it's just glorious. I mean, it can
Right.
get up to 60 degrees and sunny, and it's beautiful, and it's, you know, there's no one around for literally 1,000 miles.
Virtually no indication of what it was like for Greeley 180, 50 years ago.
It is identical, absolutely identical to what it was like for Greeley 120 years ago.
Okay.
Most of the places where we were, people had never even been there since Greeley had been there.
Wow.
And Greeley's, the equipment that Greeley had was just laying on the ground.
What? Still there?
It's all still there. And because it's what they call an Arctic desert, because it's so cold most of the time and dry, things barely even decompose. So there are stoves and there are buildings and there are tin cans and everything. The cloth was it's just laying on the ground.
Wow, what did that feel like to walk into this time warp, so to speak?
It's totally mystical.
Oh,
yeah, it's amazing.
That's fascinating.
And especially considering, well, the southern area where we were, Cape Sabine, where Greeley's men died.
Yeah.
You're standing right where 19 guys froze and starved to death over the course of 8 months. So it's a haunted place.
That really had to take your breath away.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
oh my goodness.
It's an amazing place to be.
And so, but snow and weather and stuff didn't cover things up and hide things?
Oh, it does, but in the summertime,
then it melts back again?
it melts. So it's mostly it's bare tundra. Most, except for the glaciers and a few places, or when it snows for a couple of days. But most of the time, it's bare tundra, which is something that I don't think most people realize when you talk about the Arctic.
Right.
The Arctic in the summertime is not all white.
Okay. No, you're right. Nobody realizes that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh. Okay, so it sounds like maybe ecologically things are kind of balanced up there.
Well, no. I mean, global warming is a huge problem up there.
And what were you able to see?
All
about
the
that
glaciers, all the glaciers are melting. You can see where the scientists have put in posts where the glacier was last year,
right,
and where the glacier is this year, and where the glacier was 2 years ago, and they're all just moving back very rapidly.
Wow.
The big concern is across the way. Ellesmere Island, which is the 10th largest island in the world, is right next to Greenland. There's only a narrow 25-mile strait between the two, and the Greenland ice cap is 2.5 miles thick. If that melts, it will raise the sea level around the world 3 feet.
Oh.
And every major city, almost every major city in the world is within 3 feet of sea level.
Right. And it's not so much a question of if it melts as to when it's going to melt.
It's melting.
Right.
It's melting.
Is how fast.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's melting faster than anything in the last 100,000 years.
Wow. Okay, so you're hired to tell the story.
Right.
And you have a privately financed company that takes you up there, and you have the supplies and the equipment. And then you have diaries or research, the background in terms
The
of...
story's pretty well documented.
storyboard,
Greeley
okay.
wrote a 2-volume set called 3 Years in the Arctic.
Okay.
Or 3 Years of Arctic Service, which is a very detailed account of his time up there.
Okay.
Plus, the U.S. Army required every man on the expedition, all 25 men, to keep a personal diary, which was then given over to the government.
Oh.
Plus, Greeley's chief enlisted man, this guy named David Brainerd,
Okay.
kept a very detailed account and wrote his own book when he got back, which is also a really good read.
Wow.
So there's no dearth of material in their own words about what it was like when they were there, and they suddenly realized they had 1 month of food and 8 months of winter left.
Wow.
And how they felt about that.
Wow. So you're up there accompanied by this great grandson,
Right,
James.
James.
And now did he read these diaries and all these kinds of things as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's in his family, the story of Greeley is a huge hero in his family. They called him the Old General.
Right. Okay.
And there are still living relatives of James that remember Greeley when they were children.
Oh, wow.
So Greeley talks to them, James talks to them. His
Okay.
father is also fascinated with the Greeley story. In fact, on the date that Greeley was rescued, on June 22nd of 1884,
Right.
on that anniversary, his father fasts and reads from Greeley's diary.
Wow.
So,
to honor him. Wow.
yeah, so this is a big part of James's life and story.
Yeah, so this heritage has been passed down to this young man who's, how old is he now?
James is, I think, 23
Okay.
now, 23 or 24.
Okay.
He had just, at this time, he had just graduated from college, and Jeff Clark, who sponsored the expedition, had actually gone to his father and told him that he was interested in sponsoring this expedition, and was he interested? And the father said, well, I don't have the time, and my back is not good, and so I can't do it. But I think my son would be interested. James would be interested. So James jumped at the chance. Yeah, not really realizing what he was getting into.
Sure. So you must have become very close over this trip and the putting together of this with this young man as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's a neat experience too. So you've shared with us some of the footage, and and we have some additional footage to look at.
Right.
Based on what we're going to be seeing, and this is going to be broadcast early 2006.
Not early,
Not
sometime
okay.
in 2000.
Sometime in 2006.
We're going to broadcast it on PBS sometime in 2006, and we're
Okay.
also taking it the film festival route, and we hope to have it into theaters at some point.
So we get a chance to view this. This is the first time it's going to be
premiere.
public
Yes.
premiere, which is very exciting for us, and I thank you very much because I
it's
know
fun to show.
I hope everybody at home realizes how special and exciting this is just for us.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and show?
Let me set it
a
up
section.
for you.
Set it
the
up for
clip.
us,
Okay.
and then we'll talk
So
about
this clip comes at about 15 or 20 minutes into the film. The
Okay.
film's broken into 2 hours, 2 one-hour pieces, or a 90-minute piece. That's
Okay.
the 90-minute festival. Anyway, about 20 minutes into the film, you've already been introduced to James and his family, and you know something about Greeley and Greeley's history growing up and why he was
Okay.
going. Now James is finally leaving for the Arctic.
it. Okay.
So it starts in this location called Yellowknife, which is a fascinating place in the Canadian Northwest Territories. It's the capital of the Canadian Northwest Territories.
Okay.
And it's right on the cusp of the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
And that's where everyone gathered, all the 5 experienced Arctic expedition guys and James, plus the production crew, all gather in Yellowknife, because people were coming from, we had a cameraman from Utah, another cameraman from London, we had crew members from Banff, I came from Boston, Jeff came from Portsmouth, James came from another part of New Hampshire. So everybody sort of gathers in Yellowknife, and this is the beginning of the film, and you'll see us in the airplane heading to the far north.
Oh wow. Okay, great.
So
So
we
why don't we
should
go
just
ahead and
roll.
roll tape, please?
June 16, 2004. Today, I start my journey north. We gather in Yellowknife, capital of the Canadian Northwest Territories, and just on the cusp of the Arctic Circle. There are 9 of us all together, 6 kayakers, including myself, and 3 others who will staff the base camp. Our plane is packed tight with food, kayaks, and supplies, plus a case of beer and a big bucket of fried chicken. It's our last taste of civilization for quite a while. From Yellowknife, we fly 1,000 miles north to the tiny Inuit settlement of Resolute. From there, we head another 600 miles northeast to the frozen island of Ellesmere, the 10th largest island in the world. For hour upon hour, we fly above mountains, snow, and ice. I haven't seen even the slightest sign of human habitation. So beautiful and pristine, but changing practically before our eyes. The glaciers are all shrinking, and scientists say the summer ice will be gone within the next 100 years. Jeff Clark put the expedition together. 20 years ago, he took a vacation to Ellesmere and became obsessed with Greeley's forgotten story. Steve Smith will lead the expedition. He's a biologist who's been guiding trips to the Arctic for more than 2 decades. I hear he once shot a polar bear while they were both inside his tent.
So this is a very nice setup of some of the key characters, but also with the graphics, a wonderful depiction of literally how far away it is. And we don't, it doesn't even, you're right, it doesn't occur to anybody how much more space there is up there.
Right, right, and there's no one up there.
Right.
I mean, this takes place in a new territory, new Canadian territory. I mean, Americans know so little about Canada.
Oh, yes.
About 5 years ago, I think it's 5 years ago, Canada broke up the Northwest Territory and split it into 2 territories.
Okay.
And almost half of all of Canada is this new territory called Nunavut, which is completely populated and owned by natives.
Okay.
And I think the total number of natives is unbelievably small. You know, like 10,000 or something in this territory.
It's
that
probably
is, you know, half of Canada.
Jeez.
And they're all in these tiny little settlements, the Resolute settlement that we went to. And then,
Right.
but where we are, it's so far north that they don't even live that far north.
Okay.
There's one small settlement of 250 that live at the very bottom of Ellesmere Island, and that's artificial. The Canadian government moved them there from the south to establish Canadian sovereignty over the island, and the natives then sued Canada for doing it, and they got all this money, which they promptly built this is the irony of all ironies, a skating rink.
You're kidding.
A skating rink and one of the nicest airports you've ever seen.
Wow.
On, you know, this community of 250 people.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So now, did you have to, did you or did Jeff Clark have to deal with government permits and all this kind of stuff, and that must have taken an immense amount of time as well?
Yeah, that was pretty logistically complicated.
Wow.
About half the film takes place in Canada's largest national park.
Okay.
The station where Greeley initially established on Ellesmere, that he stayed 2 years, that place is part of this park. And so you need all sorts of park permits. And as I said, the equipment and everything and the old buildings are still all there, but they're very concerned about vandalism or about anything. So you need to have a park ranger with you at all times. You need to have the park permits. Plus, Canada has very strict rules about even bringing foreign film crews into Canada, because well, it mostly comes out of the feature film industry. Nope, I don't know how many people know this, but a great many American films have been filmed over the last 2 decades in Canada, mostly in Toronto,
Right.
because it's cheaper up there.
Cheaper, and it looks like they can make that city
Looks
look
like-
like our cities,
Right.
a generic American city.
Right, and they've established a very strong film industry with all the skilled people up there.
Great.
But the Canadians try to protect that, so they make it as difficult as possible to bring American cinematographers or directors or anything like that in there. So you have to go through this hoops to try to get teams up there.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So you have the government red tape to deal with. You have a private exploration crew that's been hired. You have this private citizen, James Shedd. You have your film crew, and now you have food, clothing, timing, scheduling, documentation of this whole.
Well, you saw in the film
troop.
that airplane, a 4-engine cargo transport plane
Jeez.
called the Dash 7 that was, hired to fly,
Right.
tons, literally tons of gear, all the way up to Ellesmere Island.
That's fascinating. Now, about how long did it take you to put together all of the logistics of this?
Well, luckily I didn't have to deal with most of that.
Okay.
So between Steve Smith, the expedition leader,
Right.
and Jeff Clark, the expedition organizer, those guys pretty much did all that.
Okay.
My job was to make sure that we had a good cameraman, enough
Right.
film, and just concentrate on the filming of the expedition.
Now, how did you compile your crew?
Well, we worked with a very small crew because it was very expensive.
Sure.
So there's basically myself as the director, and then we had an expedition cameraman who's from Utah, and he's climbed Mount McKinley a number of times. He's
Okay.
been on Everest. He's done this tremendous amount of expedition camera work.
Okay.
And he was actually one of the expedition members, so he was I wasn't in the kayaks.
Okay.
I stayed in base camp. There were 6 members in the kayak, so there are 4 experienced expedition kayakers, plus James, plus this very experienced cameraman in the kayaks.
Wow.
And then I had a second cameraman, favorite documentary cameraman of mine from London,
Okay.
who flew in for the last 2 weeks,
Okay.
which turns out to be very fortuitous because Scott, our cameraman, was nearly killed in the kayaks 2 weeks in.
How did that come about?
Well, as I said, it's extremely dangerous up there. What's
Right.
the dangerous part is in the ice, because in the open water, the ice is constantly moving and being pushed by the tide and the wind,
Sure.
and the big chunks of ice come together, and if you're between 2 chunks of ice as they come together, you're toast. There's nothing you can do. So that's basically what happened. They were in the kayaks. They were moving along a shoreline, and the ice on the shore is frozen to the shore. It's called the ice foot.
Okay.
And depending on the tide, it can, the tide goes up and down, so the ice foot proceeds to get taller.
Right.
And there's a chunk so they're moving through this narrow piece of water, and a big chunk of ice came in like this and crushed Scott in the kayak.
Oh, gosh.
And within 60 seconds, it had crushed all his ribs. He had literally gone blind. The pressure of the blood being pushed into his brain just, was devastating.
Oh, my goodness.
Lost consciousness, and
other people there are watching because you're all
can't
they
get
can
him
see
out.
each other.
They can't get him out because it's, no matter what, it's like a freight train.
You go push the piece of ice away. It doesn't
Right,
exactly
the ice
work
could
that
be a
way.
mile wide.
Oh, my
you know.
gosh.
So luckily, the ice stopped moving for a moment, just enough, and it sort of gave a little breathing room, and they were able to get him out. And now they're on this ice, floating out in the sea,
Right.
and the fog has come in, and they can't get a helicopter in to save him.
Oh, my God.
And they don't know what his condition is. They all have great medical experience, but
Sure.
they don't know what the extent of the internal injuries are.
Until when?
Well, they never know, really. What happens is, so they've got him, and a helicopter comes into the fog line up to the lot. Helicopters hate fog more than
course.
anything else because they're three-dimensional craft.
Sure.
An airplane doesn't worry about it quite so much. You can fly in
Right.
instruments. Helicopters, you basically can't. There was a helicopter pilot working with us because I had been flying a lot in the helicopters, shooting in the aerials that you see.
Okay.
And he got to know myself and Scott very well because we had been flying quite a bit with him. And he just said, I'm going in. So he flew blind in a helicopter through the fog, guided only by his GPS and by the instructions on the satellite phone from the expedition members, and lands on a piece of ice that's 50 feet wide with a helicopter and pulls Scott off.
So it could just as easily have turned
Could have
fatal
gotten
for
much
him.
worse. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So.
Now, do you have this footage as part of this?
Oh, that's the climax of the first hour.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We flew him back to Ottawa. We got him to a military base, and from there they had sent up a medical jet, and they flew him by jet down to Ottawa to a tertiary care hospital. And he had 7 broken ribs, punctured lung, separated shoulder. Luckily his eyesight came back, but he was recuperating for quite a while. And
I mean, it sounded like he was about a hair's length away from, crushing some of his
they
major
said
organs.
if his blood pressure in his head had risen more than 3 pounds more, he would have died. I mean, the vessels just would have burst and he would have died. And he was within seconds of death.
So did the mood greatly change?
Completely.
Oh
Completely.
my gosh.
So after that, there's insurrection within the members of the team. They don't want to. The team members don't want to go out there again. The leader has to convince them that after he was pulled off, they basically assumed that it was going to end. If he had died, that would have been the end of the expedition.
Oh, gosh.
But even then, they were thinking, James, I know, he told me, I thought this was the end of the expedition. We were just going home. And then they had some discussions, and they decided, well, we're here. We might as well continue.
Right.
But then it's this issue of going out into the water again, and they really had to wrestle with that.
How frightening was that? I mean, with all of their knowledge, all of the equipment, and just the trust in each other. And
Yeah.
you're right, that's all blown away
Yeah.
with that. Oh, Gina, thank you so much for coming and sharing this. We're very much looking forward to the advanced publicity on Abandoned in the Arctic, which we're expecting to see on PBS in 2006. We're also going to hear some news about it from Paris Film Festival, Telluride, Banff. And so on behalf of the Hockomock Film Festival, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Sussman, your host. Please check out our website, hockomockfilmfestival.com. Thank you to Northeastern Savings Bank and to Clearpoint Communications for all of their support. Look for us again at this channel, Mondays and Tuesdays at 7 o'clock, Thursdays at 4:30. Thank you so much. Good night.